even if you're getting very good forecast accuracy, 80% of your items are going to be more than 40% wrong for each month of the forecast. That's just the way it is. Forecasts, 80% mix accuracy looks great, but that's because some are high, some are low, and they average out. Each individual item is going to be inaccurate.
Welcome to Chain Reaction, the podcast for the supply chain and logistics industry. If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Welcome back to Chain Reaction Podcast. I'm Michael Ostroumov. I'm a CEO of Flox Logistics Marketplace. This podcast is brought to you by Flox as a way to engage with logistics and supply chain professionals. And we explore ideas, people, and thinking that are shaping the industry. Before we get started, please subscribe to the channel. It helps us grow and reach more people and a wider audience who value practical, thoughtful, and insightful conversations around supply chain. Today, I'm joined by Simon Eagle, a supply chain consultant with deep expertise in demand planning and S&OP solutions. Simon spent years helping organizations rethink how they plan, balance demand and supply, and improve decision-making across complex supply chains. Simon, great to have you here.
Hello, Michael.
I'd like to start, Simon, pretty much all of the guests. I'd like to start with the question around how did your journey begin? So how did you get into supply chain, and more specifically, how did you get into demand planning and S&OP? Kind of what drew you to that space?
Michael, my career started in sales and then commercial, and particularly in health science. And I was working at the time for a generics pharmaceutical company on the commercial side. But it was clear to me that what dictated the success of that company was cost management, levels of service, and cash flow. And that was all about supply chain. So on the commercial side, I became frustrated with the inability, as I saw it then, of the factory to provide the product that we wanted when we wanted it. And I became more and more interested in what they were doing, how they were doing it. And over time, I moved right across the so-called divide into that space. And I really started thinking that, it was all about forecast accuracy because that's what drives MRP. And over a number of years, I began to realize that actually high levels of forecast accuracy were impossible to achieve, even if you're getting 80% MAPE, weighted MAPE. 80% of your SKUs are going to be 60% wrong. And that, of course, leads to a lot of turbulence upstream as expedites take place. So I focused really there on trying to work out how we could support the factory to provide the products that we wanted in a manner that enabled them to stay stable and efficient. And I quickly came to the conclusion that driving factories with inaccurate forecasts and expediting to avoid back orders was not the way to do it.
It's a fascinating subject, and I'm glad that you mentioned kind of one word that I picked on in particular is a divide. So can we just step back a little bit from the approach, and we'll get to that in a second. But if we talk about that, the kind of the supply chain and operational planning function or the activity overall, because it may mean something for bigger organizations, and they have dedicated planners, and they have colleagues that are focusing on that. In an SME world, not even the startups, but even the businesses that are of a medium size, and I've seen many of them in my consulting days, they don't have such a system, they don't have such a thinking and such an approach. So can you just elaborate a bit more, like what it's for, what S&OP does, what it's good at, some of the terminology around it, because there are some people call this IBPs or integrated business planning. Some talk about S&OP, some talk about just demand planning and forecasting. So there are various things there. It's it sounds very, very complex and technical field. But kind of what is it good at, and what problems is it solving, and what are the most basic kind of approaches of addressing those?
Okay, so in any company that is providing trying to make stock available for customers straight from the warehouse. We order today, we get delivery tomorrow, sort of ex-stock manufacturers. What they've got to try to do is to provide a forecast of what they think they're going to sell and get the factory to make that so that it arrives when the demand comes in. And they translate, therefore, the forecast into a master production schedule. The master production schedule is then blown into MRP, and that drives replenishment of materials right from raw material supply through the factory and conversion to the right levels of stock in the warehouse. Now, big companies, FMCG, big life science companies, they're doing that with ERP systems and APS systems and concurrent planning systems. And in each case, what they're doing is spending a lot of time expediting, because that forecast that they're using is very inaccurate. And that's why, despite that investment in all those systems, their planners are still using spreadsheets. So they revert from the expensive software to the spreadsheet, because the spreadsheet allows them to operate the way they want to operate and not follow the recommendations of the system, which frankly are ununderstandable and generate a lot of turbulence upstream. So in actual fact, those companies are not very different to the SMEs that you're referring to, who perhaps don't have those expensive systems and are by default having to use spreadsheets. So despite the fact that there are SMEs that are low tech and big companies that are high tech, they're all using the same methodology, and they're all reversing to spreadsheets in one way or another to enable the planner to actually manage something which is extraordinarily complex and which uses rules of thumb as opposed to the technology in the system. Because the technology in the system is built actually in a manner that destabilizes the factory.
What kind of strikes me as well is, for some of the SME businesses, they do a lot of contract manufacturing. So I wonder to what extent, because I still think it's applicable. So even if you're not running your own factory, which could be all the way from Apple down to I don't know, cosmetics manufacturers, because I know that some of the beauty products and some of the over-the-counter medicines and so forth, they're made by contractors somewhere on the other side of the planet, which may or may not require some detailization of planning, and the spreadsheets come in. So all of this thinking is applicable even if you don't run your own facility, the manufacturing facility.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, a factory runs successfully when it can make what it's designed to make in a stable sequence without having to chop and change its priorities on a daily basis. Now, if you are a make-to-order business, that's relatively straightforward, in as much as your customer provides you with an order of what you want, of what they want, and you make it and you ship it. Where the contract manufacturer will have a problem is if the customer says, actually, we ordered that, but we don't want so much now. We want something else more as a higher priority. That destabilizes the contract manufacturer. So the contract manufacturer in that situation, and actually raw material suppliers supplying a lot of ex-stock companies, they tend to have inflated lead times so that they have the opportunity to chop and change their schedules without and to be able to meet their service level agreements. So they inflate the lead times to enable themselves to do that. And of course, they also quote prices that reflect the fact that they're going to have to chop and change their schedules. So they're probably charging too much, and they're quoting long lead times because they know that they're going to be destabilized by their customer, who is actually planning their purchase orders on the basis of forecasts that are wholly incorrect.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because to some of the kind of the colleagues and professionals in that space that I've spoken with, to some of them, it means sometimes it just means, well, the inaccuracy of my forecast will just simply, I mean, potentially delay my order, or I might have a bit too much stock. But what people don't realize is that, exactly as you described, those changeovers on the manufacturing side, when you need to change flavor and you need to I don't know, produce, I don't know, strawberry flavor and then vanilla flavor and so forth. And you actually, all those changeovers in the frequency, they then get baked into the price.
Absolutely, Michael. Um, you know, as I said, factories need to be stable. They need to know what they're going to make, what sequence they're going to be making it in, and they don't want to be disturbed. Because if they get disturbed, an expedite, for instance, and they have to change the sequence or change the schedule, they're going to be wasting capacity. So that's costing money, of course. The other thing that's happening is that the lead time on the items that are being interrupted is then going to increase. Now, if the lead time has increased, it's going to arrive late. And if it's going to arrive late, there's going to be a backorder threat. So in effect, one expedite is leading to more expedites. So the first expedite was caused by forecast inaccuracy. The second expedite is caused by the fact that you've interrupted the sequence of manufacturing. So you've increased the lead times. So you get a vicious circle of expedite over expedite on expedite. And if you remember, every expedite is wasting capacity, that's cost. Every expedite is increasing lead time, which is causing more expediting. It's also increasing stock, because as lead times expand through Little's law, inventory increases as well. So what you end up with, and it's much more recognizable in companies that are ex-stock manufacturers, FMCG, life science, for instance, is they end up with a factory that has far more capacity than they need, but it's fully utilized because they keep chopping and changing the schedules. They have far more inventory than they need. So average inventory should be the average batch size plus the should be half the average batch size plus the safety stock over a portfolio, but they always have far more than that because of this inventory increase issue. And their lead times are far longer than they should be, so their responsiveness has been reduced. They effectively end up with a very bloated factory that is frustrated with the chopping and changing of the schedules. It's higher cost than it needs be, and they're still struggling to achieve their target service levels.
Yeah, and then you mentioned that, yes, absolutely, bloated inventory. So you have too much capital then locked in as a working capital, and then the cherry on the cake is when you have overstock and you want to dump it, you actually cut your margins, and you at a massive discount you ship the products out just to free up space for some new stuff coming in, and it's double whammy. Yes.
Absolutely. Either that happens, Michael, or they end up having to write it off because it's out of date. And of course, the finance people are not happy with the cash flow. The commercial people aren't happy with the level of service that they are receiving. Also, they're not very happy with being blamed for providing inaccurate forecasts, when in actual fact, in volatile demand environments, high forecast accuracy is impossible. And of course, the shareholders aren't happy with the high cost of goods and the lack of competitiveness of the business. So the traditional way of driving replenishment, driven by inaccurate forecasts, falls down as soon as you convert that inaccurate forecast into a master production schedule, because you're then guaranteeing that the follow-up is going to be lots of expediting. And that's what the spreadsheets are being used by the planners to help them to do. And they think that by interrupting the schedules and expediting, they are somehow being agile. But in fact, what they're doing is, well, I don't blame them. They have to do it because if they have poor service levels, they get into problems. They get their, job security is affected. But what the shareholders don't realize is that this methodology is causing them to be uncompetitive.
Okay, well, can we talk a little bit about that, because I think we are getting to a very interesting point of so what do you do all about that? So it's like there's a massive problem, and it seems to be a very kind of hugely multidimensional one. So how do you solve it? How do you address it? So can you because we talked about earlier that you are you're advocating a different approach that solves quite a lot of those issues. So can you talk a little bit about, well, this is the approach, this is the typical and traditional approach and kind of a widely accepted and used. It does X and Y and Z. People look at X and Y, but it has such and such problems. And then the alternative way, and you can describe exactly what that is.
Okay, yeah. Well, so the standard methodology used by MRP, ERP, APS concurrent planning is drive replenishment with a master production schedule, which has been driven by an inaccurate forecast, to a safety stock target in the finished goods warehouse. Now, the consequence of doing that is that where you under forecast, you're going to receive exception messages saying your target service, or sorry, your target stock is going to be undershot. You need to expedite. Now, exception messages are prolific in ERP, APS, etc. And planners don't really know which are the important ones and which aren't the important ones. However, they use their spreadsheets to determine where they think they've got a serious problem and where the problem isn't so serious. And they decide then which they're going to expedite and which they're not. So straight away, they've stopped using all that fancy technology and they're doing it all in spreadsheets to see where they've got the right level of stock cover, in their opinion. But then they still, of course, expedite. And expediting, as we've said, generates a lot of bloat in the factory. So that's the standard methodology. It's been around since the 1960s. It's become more and tech enhanced. There's been a lot of technology thrown at forecasting, but forecasting accuracy in a volatile demand world isn't going to improve. 80% is still world class across a portfolio, but as I said earlier, 80% of the SKUs are still going to be more than 40% wrong. So expediting continues to be rife, no matter how much money is being thrown at it. Now, there is an alternative methodology, one that does the absolute root cause elimination of the issue with forecast push. And that is, it completely disconnects the factory from the forecast inaccuracy. It completely decouples it, it desensitizes replenishment from forecast inaccuracy. And what we're doing is we're effectively going back to the way we used to work before MRP was invented, albeit we're now doing it in a manner which actually uses all the technology that we have today to do it in a very sophisticated manner. And that is effectively pull replenishment. So what we do is we calculate how much stock do we need in finished goods and how much stock do we need at various other positions within the supply chain. So those other positions would be raw materials and at disaggregation points within the factory. And you set stock targets there that reflect demand in the future from the forecast, which is calculated as an average over 3 months or so, plus something for variability and something for trend. So you set a stock target and each supply position is decoupled from each other. And then the planners effectively replenish each stock bucket back up to target with whatever is the agreed frequency that has been decided is most efficient for the business. And that is simply all that happens. Inventory is then moved through the supply chain in line with actual demand. So if you sell more, you make more. If you sell less, you make less. But all the materials move through the supply chain in line with demand without need for interruption and expediting. They follow what's actually being sold. So if demand is volatile, you hold more safety stock or variability buffer. If there's trend, then you set the targets accordingly. And because you've eliminated the expedites, the factory can become very, very efficient. It can work to a very stable, efficient sequence and cycle, not be interrupted. And because you're not interfering with the replenishment, lead times start to come down. You use considerably less capacity and you hold a lot less actual inventory. So although you're positioning inventories within the supply chain, you're not building inventories that weren't already there. Inventory was already there when you were using the forecast push methodology. You're simply parameterizing inventory that's already there and replenishing according to those parameters. And so long as demand is, I'm not going to use the word stable here, so long as the volatility of demand stays within a level of volatility that is known, you will meet all demand. What it won't be able to service, and frankly, no methodology can service these occurrences, is where you have a big spike demand that is completely different to what has ever been seen before or is very unexpected. Those have to be anticipated, and that's where sales and operations planning can become very helpful. Because when you get these spike demands, what you have to do is anticipate them. And this is where commercial and operations can collaborate in a much more meaningful manner than they had done so hitherto. In the past, sales and operations planning is a little bit of finger pointing, forecasting inaccuracy on the one side, poor service levels on the other, and finance being concerned about poor cash flow and high costs. When you've introduced the demand-driven methodology, you can focus on dealing with the exceptions, those spike demands that are coming to come through. Usually somebody from commercial knows it's going to happen. They can tell the factory that it's going to happen via supply chain, and an advanced stock build can be done in order to meet it. So we have demand-driven replenishment, which is very, very efficient. We have spike demand management, which is by exception. And we still need, of course, capacity planning. Now, capacity planning carries on like it used to, but in this situation, the capacity planning is accurate because no longer are we using far more capacity than we had forecast because of all the expedites. We now find that capacity planning is accurate. Our service levels are where they should be. Our inventory turn is what we expect. And our use of additional capacity for the expediting comes down quite significantly. So sales and operations planning becomes a far more value-add activity than it had been when it was under forecast push.
You are listening to Chain Reaction. This podcast is brought to you by Phlox, the leading marketplace for the supply chain and logistics industry. Visit phlox.is to find out how you find the perfect supplier or make your services available to prospective buyers. Thanks for tuning in. Now back to the show.
Simon, can I ask you this then? How does this work organizationally where fairly often the demand forecast inaccuracy is driven by people, not by system? When you have, because I have a client that produces alcoholic beverages, and the sales team tends to consistently overpromise and underdeliver. Because salespeople they're quite enthusiastic, and they sometimes might get overexcited about the promises from their customers. So they produce a planned for sales forecast to a production team that converts it into, well, how much do we need to make in order to satisfy that demand? And the problems occur when if you can make potentially kind of a adjustment. It's like, well, yeah, the sales team tend to over forecast by 20%, so I'm going to knock it off, and I'm going to plan production according to a 20% lower forecast. The problem is the volatility of a product by product, the SKU by SKU could be very, very different. It could be at 100% bang on for some, and it could be, I don't know, 50% off for some other. So how do you deal with that? Provided what I've heard you saying is it's almost just a corporate decision saying we're not going to be jerking our upstream supply chain, like no expedite orders. If you haven't made it, then we haven't made it. We don't have it in stock. So how does that work?
No, no, Michael, sorry, there's a little bit of a misunderstanding there. Uh, we eliminate the expedite orders that are caused by very significant forecast inaccuracy. We get rid of those because we don't need to expedite any longer. It's not a case of we're banning expedites. What we're doing is we are desensitizing replenishment from inevitable forecast inaccuracy. So we are setting the stock targets based upon the average of the forecast going forward, plus something for error. So we're still building error margins into the calculations. But because we're doing this in a manner where we're not developing master production schedules based upon those inaccurate forecasts, what happens is that the factory then tracks what actually is sold. So if you sell more, you make more. If you sell less, you make less. The only reason that you would need to change a sequence is if a big spike order comes through, which hadn't been foreseen and which everybody agrees needs to be met. But hopefully those will be recognized in advance by the commercial teams. So this isn't about diktat that says, thou shalt not expedite. It's about setting up a replenishment methodology that isn't sensitive to gross under forecasting, which unfortunately inevitably happens. Now, in the world that you were just describing, where you've got a forecast that has been generated for each SKU, that forecast may be up and down and all over the place. One thing we know about it is that that forecast is wrong, but on average, it's right. Over the long term, it's probably right. So what we do is we set a stock target through the supply chain that enables us to meet that level of demand with a level of error so that we can meet that demand when it comes in, when it's high, when it's low, in a manner without having to expedite. So when we sell more, we make more. When we sell less, we make less. We've always got the inventory there. We can always meet the demand, but we're not having exception message coming through saying you've got to expedite because they're no longer needed.
So the approach is, so I'm wondering how you combine kind of the traditional approach with what you're discussing. Is that what it means that it's more of a way how to treat how to treat different systems, because we have a lot of demand forecasting systems are just very sophisticated analytical models that take historical data that could be 3 years old, 1 year old, and it's with a various degree of accuracy try to approximate what the future demand is going to look like. Some of them are taken into account. I don't know, weather. I mean, if it's beverages, for example, yeah, the weather, the forecast is going to get higher, so the people will drink more. So it does that. But so it is then that type of forecast. It kind of it's on its own. Could be a very nice one, but then it needs to be translated into a production forecast. So what do we make, when, and how? So yes, please.
So what happens, Michael, is that a lot of companies spend a lot of money on forecasting systems, which is fine, but they're using those forecasts incorrectly. They're converting those forecasts into master production schedules. So the accuracy of the master production schedule is only as accurate as the forecast. And as we've said, even if you're getting very good forecast accuracy, 80% of your items are going to be more than 40% wrong for each month of the forecast. That's just the way it is. Forecasts, 80% mix accuracy looks great, but that's because some are high, some are low, and they average out. Each individual item is going to be inaccurate. And those where there is an under forecast, the planners are going to have to be expediting because what they plan to make based upon that low forecast is not enough. Therefore, they're going to get a service problem. Therefore, they're going to expedite. Expediting causes all the problems. So we carry on forecasting using whatever algorithms or technology that you've got, but we just use that forecast in a different way. We simply take the average of the forecast out for the next 3 months or so, and we convert that forecast into a stock target based upon however frequently we wish to replenish, plus something for forecast error. So setting a stock target or a reorder point, which is effectively what we're doing, is we're using the forecast as stock to calculate that reorder point, and we're adding something for the error so that the factory is then able to keep that stock replenished to the level that it should be based upon how much is actually consumed by the customers. So instead of the factory being driven by a forecast that is wrong, the factory is driven by demand as it actually happens. So as I said, as you sell more, you replenish more. As you sell less, you replenish less. But you always stay in stock unless there's a spike demand, which you have to anticipate. But those spike demands are, as I said earlier, very much by exception and are things that the commercial team need to focus upon and provide the information early so that the factory can make the right capacity decisions.
So it sounds like it's a combination of tech and the way people do things. Does that approach eliminate spreadsheets, or does that approach, I don't know, help running the right spreadsheets? How does the combination of what sits in people's heads versus the spreadsheets that they are running versus massively sophisticated tech they could be employed, how the combination of all of three works and how to make the best of all of that?
Yeah, so your standard ERP and MRP and APS systems can't use this methodology because they use a fully coupled supply network. They are not able to decouple different parts of the supply chain from each other. So unfortunately, your ERP system and your APS system can't help at all. Your concurrent planning system can't help at all. You can use your ERP system as a transaction system, but your actual replenishment methodology, which is what we're talking about here, has to be implemented either via spreadsheet system, which you can design yourself. It's a bit clunky, but at least it's a spreadsheet system that works as opposed to a spreadsheet system that doesn't work, because most people using forecast push are basically replicating forecast push in their spreadsheets. So you can actually drive replenishment using a demand-driven methodology using spreadsheets. But, do you really want to drive your factory with spreadsheets? I would advise not to. It's really rather an expensive thing, and your customers depend upon your service levels, and your finance people and shareholders want low costs and high cash flow. So do you really want to be driving your asset like that with a spreadsheet? I would advise not. There are softwares on the market nowadays that interface with your ERP system. It's not an old style interface where everybody fell off the bridge with the cost of it. It's very easy. It's software as a service or cloud software. It interfaces with your ERP. And that sort of software nowadays calculates the stock targets for you. It tells you what you've got to order, when you've got to order it. You set it up so that you're using the right sequence with the right cycle. It even is able to look forward and look at the forecast and look at orders and identify spike orders so that you can do these one-off adjustments of supply to meet the spike orders. It also provides you with the technology to do capacity planning. So it moves you away from a forecast push replenishment methodology to a decoupled pull methodology with event management and capacity planning, all in a piece of replenishment technology that actually is built for a world of very volatile demand where you don't want to expedite. And by getting rid of the expediting, you then end up with an efficient factory, good cash flow, and high service levels. The software, it comes under the moniker demand-driven MRP. There is a whole bunch of software providers now that provide this sort of software, and it is jolly effective, for all the reasons that we've explained. But really, it boils down to is it's decoupled pull as opposed to forecast push.
I understand. Thank you. This is interesting as a fascinating topic, and it's a mega complex one, and I'm sure that we barely scratched the surface. But I think I'm afraid that we are out of time. But I like asking this one last question to all my guests, and you've highlighted quite a few problems, and definitely kind of a big challenges and a big divide within the organizations, and you've seen what works and what doesn't in many. So if you had a magic wand and you can wave it and you can instantly fix one fundamental issue in how companies actually approach demand planning, what would it be?
I would hope that the people who run supply chain operations with big factories that are trying to provide good service levels to their customers might get to see this program of yours, Michael, and show some interest in demand-driven methodology as a means of driving their factories, because one of the things it will do is make them far more competitive in terms of cost, service level, and cash flow. And it is a lot easier to implement than they might think. And the transformation it will have in their business is something to behold. Those companies that do it really can't stop scratching their heads, wondering why it took them 30 or 40 years to realize that there was a far better way of working.
Right. Yeah. I think kind of appreciation of sometimes I wouldn't say the simplicity of thinking, but sometimes just stepping out of a very kind of traditional routine way of working can make a quite a substantial impact. Thanks very much, Simon. It was a pleasure having you. I hope if somebody will reach out, we'll definitely gonna have a conversation. I'll encourage the viewers, whoever stayed with us, to reach out. But thank you, Simon, for joining the conversation and for sharing your insights. That was indeed very thought provoking kind of a conversation. I hope it will continue. And to everyone that's still watching and listening, thank you for staying with us. Hope this episode was valuable, and we look forward to welcoming you again in the next episode of The Chain Reaction. Thank you.
Pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Chain Reaction. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have a story or insights to share from your sector, we'd love to hear from you. Simply reach out to us through the links in the description. See you next time.